Hello everybody, welcome to this video. I'm not really going to cover previews for all of the cards. There might be another video later where I talk about the set as a whole when I have more experience with it. But one thing in particular I really want to talk about are the loot cards from Dominion Plunder. Now, I'll briefly go over them as I talk about them. Like I'll show you what they are. I don't know if you can see this, but I do have this tab handy, so you can pause here and read them all if you like. But I'll try and read them out as I talk about them. But I really enjoy loot a lot. I think it's really interesting. It's like a payload mechanic that's really cool, and I look forward to playing with loot. And so far it's easily my favorite thing in Dominion. It's since like forever. Um, like it's so cool. So loot in general, in my limited experience, I didn't playtest. I just have played playtesting. No, sorry, not playtesting. I just played the during preview week so far. And I mostly played against the bot, which can be deceptive. But so far, just messing around with this stuff, I generally find that loot is really good at getting double to triple province. It's just really good at that. And if you pursue loot and you get it in a reasonable time, that's kind of the thing I'm working out, is getting loot in a reasonable amount of time. Because sometimes it's a little hard to get. And we could talk about the enablers for loot, but I think I want to keep this video more simple, especially since I'm only played maybe like 10 games with these. So I don't want to talk too much about how to get loot, but suffice to say, it is not the easiest thing in the world to get loot, but it is very much worth it to get loot because all of the loot cards do a lot of great things. And the nice thing about them is, like, none of them are really bad except arguably Chalice. And even now you're going to hear people disagree with that and say it's actually one of the better ones. But I think overall pretty much all of these loot cards are very similar in strength, and you could put a lot of them in whatever order, and you're gonna have people disagree, but like I think you're not gonna see me like get too annoyed if you put, like, I don't know, any of these cards anywhere. To be quite honest. So I think we should start. So to wrap up, loot is really good payload. It's really good at doing double to triple province just kind of by itself, without much assistance from the rest of the board. And if you have enough engine enablers, it will just take off quite quickly and you'll do quite a bit. Although it is a little slow, just a little bit slow. Like, I found that I get like 5-6 provinces in like 15-16 turns with this, which I'm going to attribute that to me just not building optimally, because again, I'm just clicking quickly, kind of just figuring things out. But if we can get that time down like 1 or 2 turns, it's going to be very formidable, and I think we can. So I think we're going to start with the one that I think is the best so far. Although, again, I could be talked down into thinking this one's not so good. And that's Figurehead. So Figurehead here, nice. I can look at that. There's no buy on it. And in my experience, the ones without buy tend to be stronger in general. And if it had buy, it would be really good. So Figurehead does not have buy. And it says at the start of your next turn to +2 cards. So it draws you cards. And it's a payload card. The upside of that is that, well, it draws you, and drawing is great. But if you're already drawing your deck, it's not so good. But so far, even if I'm not drawing my deck, loots tend to clog up my deck quite a bit, so the extra consistency is always appreciated. And also, on top of that, if I'm drawing my deck, it just means I'm going to get more loot in general. So I'm not missing this 3 too much. I don't, from the limited amount of games I've played so far. I'm not missing it like an insane amount. But, I could totally see like moving this down. But I do think it's here. And next up, we're going to pick Insignia, which right now I think is really, really good. Which is shocking because it's Royal Seal, and that card got replaced. So why this card is so good is, it kind of surprises me, to be honest. It doesn't make a lot of sense to me that this card is so good as it is. But I've found that Insignia plays a really important role with loot in allowing me to top deck stuff to keep the consistency going. And you'll notice this card also doesn't have buy, because if it had buy, it would be absolutely insane. It would be really, really good. But usually I find with the other loot cards and the rest of the kingdom, I can get buy from other cards. There are like, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 8 out of the 15 give me buy. So it's very plus orb. I forgot orb. So it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Amphora. So 10 out of the 15 give me plus buy. Like, it's incredibly likely I'm going to have multiple plus buy. So I'm not too worked up over not having plus buy on, say, Insignia. Because, you really want to top deck consistency with Insignia. That's kind of the point. And I feel like with loot, you lose a bit of consistency, and Insignia gives you that consistency a lot more often with the top decking. And I think that's the difference between why Royal Seal feels so bad and why this card feels so great, is because you already have your consistency without Royal Seal. You're not going for loot, and loot just by itself does incredible stuff. And Royal Seal, it's just Royal Seal. And it's not even a gold, it's just silver. And you're spending 5 on it. Whereas with the loot enablers, it's easier to get your hands on this. And you'll have a lot of other loots that kind of all work in tandem. And Insignia, to me, just increases some consistency. And I don't know. You could move this anywhere, any which where. I wouldn't fight you on it, especially this early. I'm just kind of thinking aloud right now. Next up, I'm going to have Staff as my number 3. And Staff it's just very, very solid. It allows you to over-terminal. It allows you to play an action from your hand. It gives you a lot of flexibility. Again, I could see dropping this one a little bit. I could see raising it. It's just really, really, really good. But you'll notice it has plus buy, and the last 2 I looked at didn't have plus buy, which I think is telling that this card is not as good as you would first imagine. But it is a powerful effect, and I have found good use out of it, although I don't think it's a winner by itself or anything. I think it's overall a very solid card. It's just a nice payload. It has plus buy, and then sometimes you can play an action from your hand, which is pretty good. Next up is, I believe, Sword. And don't get too hung up over it's S tier, it's A, it's B. These are just placeholders. These are all very similar in power strength. I just think these cards are a slight cut above the other ones. It's not going to win or lose a game if you get one that's slightly worse. So far, in my estimation. So Sword is, again, it's just a gold, but it attacks. The attack doesn't do much early, but later in the game, it's gonna hurt. If you've ever played with Urchin, it's just a nice attack in general. It lowers your opponent's consistency and power later on in the game, but it's not like a world beater or anything in terms of attacks. It's just sometimes, once in a while it will really mess your opponent up, and that's just as good as you getting a good bonus. So next up, we're going to talk about Puzzle Box. Actually, I think Puzzle Box is like right here. I forgot about Puzzle Box. So Puzzle Box is really, really, really good. It again, a big thing I've noticed with this loot stuff is that it tends to lower your consistency somewhat because they're treasures, right? You want to have good consistency, and Puzzle Box really helps you. It sets aside a card for the next turn, and it doesn't get set aside alongside your card. You will get it next turn, and you will get Puzzle Box in your deck next turn, which is really, really good. So I could see that being better than Figurehead. Just setting aside a card. In fact, let's just do that now, because I think this is probably the best. That's probably the best loot in, to be honest. Because I've been playing with it like setting aside green, but like setting aside an action card for next turn is probably like even better. So yeah, I think it's very strong. I think all of these are quite strong. Like maybe you could put this down here. Like it's not gonna really matter. Like there's not too much drop off. It's just the reason I like these ones the most is because of the consistency, and then this effect is pretty good. And so a little less important, like, is Sextant, which I think Sextant is worse at the consistency angle than the other ones, but not by much. And I feel like once in a while, it's going to really mess up your next shuffle, so you have to like keep that in mind. Because, you're looking at the top 5 of your cards of your deck. If you're not drawing your whole deck, and you have a really good turn, you don't want to trigger a bad shuffle necessarily with this card. So it could backfire. There are some downsides for sure. But in my experience, this has been a pretty good card as well. Like, at worst, it's still a gold and a buy. And that's really, really nice for your payload. So I think it's just a solid all-around card. You can go wrong with it, whereas it's a lot harder to go wrong with something like Figurehead or Insignia or Puzzle Box. You can go wrong with Sextant, and that's why it's a little bit lower. But I think it's also very, very good. Next up, we have Hammer. Hammer is really, really, really good. I think it's fantastic. It does not have plus buy. So a big thing with these loot cards is that they are payload. And Hammer can, at worst, it gets you a silver. So if we look at like doubloon, I don't know why it's doing that. It's been kind of glitching out a little bit. They're still working on that. But like if you look at doubloons, when you get this, you get a gold. And with how many of these loots you tend to get in a game, if you're like really focusing in on it, there's not going to be much of a drop off between silver and gold. And with a card like Pickaxe, for example, I don't think Pickaxe is on this board. Oh, it is. Cool. Pickaxe is, in my opinion, very strong so far. But like you love the silver to Pickaxe into a loot card. So worked out there. So like that's worst case, and if you don't have that worst case, you're gaining action cards with your 4, increasing your consistency. If you like combine it with Insignia, you're top decking these 4 costs, making your next turn even better. If you have Sextant and you drew your whole deck, you can use Sextant to top deck those cards. Like there's a lot of like little mini synergies. Like even with Orb, Orb is we'll get to Orb. We will get to Orb. But I feel like Hammer is just a really good payload card. It's a really good engine card. It just does things really, really well. And things I like to see in a it does things I really like to see with loot decks so far. I think next up we're going to do Orb, I think. Orb is next. I mean, you could make a case for a lot of these being next. No, I think Doubloons is next. So the thing about doubloons is it doesn't have a plus buy, because if it did, it would be very, very good. I think it would be a lot better than it currently is if it had a plus buy, but because there's so much plus buy, it's not a huge deal. So again, I think a big thing about loot is that it's payload that just kind of grows on its own. And if your payload also helps you be consistent, it's the strongest it's going to be. And this is the second best thing it can do, which is increase your payload by even more. So you get 6 money for 1 loot pop, which is like the most efficient you can possibly get in the moment. Like hammer will be more efficient, but it takes 2 turns, and there's no guarantee you're going to draw your deck every single time. So I think doubloons is by and large the most efficient one if you need cash for getting stronger at buying provinces quickly. So for that reason, I have doubloons here. But again, there are going to be a lot of people that think this is bad because it's like, oh, I just gain a gold. But like, I don't know. Right now the way I'm thinking of loot is like very, very payloady. And it could be that this drops off later, right? It really could be because, maybe you just get so much loot that the extra gold doesn't matter. I mean, you could talk me into that. Next up, we're going to look at Spell Scroll. I think that's better than Orb. Yeah, I think so. So Spell Scroll is basically Wish, except it's trashing it to gain a cheaper card instead of up to 6. So, if there's a lot of cost reduction, this will be worse. You can't get a province with this, whereas you could get a province with Wish. But I think the real weakness of this card is that it's an action. You can play this during the action phase. Okay. So my complaint about this card being worse than Wish was that I thought it was just a treasure, but it's not. You can actually play this during your action phase. Okay. Does that make it better? I don't know that it does. It does increase your consistency. Maybe I'll put it here. I'll just put it here for now. I still need to play more with it. But, so, okay, if Spell Scroll works during your action phase, I just didn't even consider that, to be honest. I completely forgot that. I think even with that, though, like, you're going for loot specifically because it is payload, and Spell Scroll kind of kicks the bucket when it comes to that. It's just a consistency tool. Like, if you're getting loot to get your payload and you get this card instead, that's kind of damning a bit, because that implies that the board isn't strong enough that you wouldn't go for loot and you'd go for that instead, and now you have Spell Scroll. So it's a little bit awkward. It remains to be seen what the other loot enablers are, of course. So this could go up further, but with specific cards I'm thinking of, specific boards I'm thinking of, I feel like this drops off a little bit. It's like less payload and more just consistency, and that's definitely welcome. And maybe it's just even better. But I don't know. I just feel like it's not quite as good, right? Because it's not a loot card in the traditional sense. So it's very board dependent. Up next, I believe we're going to put Orb here. I mean, you could put it here, really. I'm going to put it... Yeah, I'll put it here. Why not? It's about the same. So Orb looks like it's really good on paper. Like, you look through your discard pile, you choose one, you can play any action or any treasure from your hand, or you get +1 buy and +3 money. And in my experience so far, I've almost always taken the buy and the money with Orb. I think it would take about a remodel variant or something that does more than +1 buy and +3 money, which is surprisingly hard to do in the buy phase. Like, this sounds like, oh, this you can do all these cool tricks and stuff, but like your turn is over. It's your buy phase. Most boards you're not really going to do more with any particular action card than getting your +1 buy and +3. Like, it takes a very specific case of like being able to gain a card and then play an action from your discard, with it top decked from Insignia, the card that you gained, that you can then draw with your orb, and then you can play that card, and that is better than +1 buy and +3 money. Like, there are use cases where this is very good, but so far, and like it combos with hammer too, right? Like, you can gain a card with hammer, and then you can orb play it. But is that really going to be better than +1 buy and +3 money? Like, if you hammer gain a silver, that's not going to be better than just doing this. So that's kind of my hang up with Orb, is it's deceptively weaker than it looks, but it's definitely not irrelevant. And again, I've only played like 10 or 12 games with these loot cards, so I easily could be misevaluating this. It could be way up here. It could be way down here. Either way, I don't think there's much of a drop off. So next up, we are going to look at jewels. So what I really like about jewels is it kind of gets out of your way and lets you be more consistent. But it does so in an even worse way than like the other cards we've been looking at. So if you don't draw your deck, jewels can be pretty sad. Because let's say you draw like 75% of your deck. Well, this bottom deck, so it actively gets in your way, and you've drawn the jewels twice, which is in one shuffle, which is like, ugh. And then it will continually bottom deck itself. So as you get less consistent, jewels kind of gets worse. But on the other hand, if you're drawing your entire deck, it gets way better because it will bottom deck itself. So if you draw your whole deck, your next turn you make a new shuffle, and then the jewels will go to the bottom of that shuffle. So it's kind of a front runner kind of card. Like, it's really good if you're already winning, and then if you're not winning, it's kind of worse, but like not that worse because it's still +3 money and +1 buy. And at the point of the game where you really care, you do want the money and you do want the payload, although it might trip you up a little bit. So I think it's a little worse than these cards, but not by much, really. Next up, I believe we have to... I'm kind of torn which one to put. I think I'll put Goat here. So Prize Goat, a lot of people are pretty excited about this one. But I mean, it really remains to be seen what other loot cards there are. But I'm going to talk about why I don't think it's nearly as good as people seem to think it is, because they see, oh, it trashes it. It must be really good. And I don't think that's bad. I think it's good. It's +3 money and +1 buy. I think that by itself is the best part about the card. But the trashing is a little bit awkward, because if you have a board where you're already like thinning out, you're not going to be like, oh, I gotta go into the loot now and hopefully I roll Prize Goat. Like, you're not doing that unless you're like trying to gambit because you're already behind and you only have like a 1 out of 15 shot of getting to Prize Goat. Now, if there's like a specific card that's like, pick the prize of your choice, and it's like super easy to get, yeah, Prize Goat might go up, but then it's just that one card too. So like, again, there are boards where it's like, if you get loot early and Prize Goat's your first loot, you're probably going to win. But I don't think that's a reflection on how good Prize Goat is. I think usually Prize Goat is like a card that makes you marginally more thin later in the game. It might help you finish off your trashing, get a little more consistent. But like, overall, it's not doing that much for you. So that's why and I put this in like quotations, low on it as I am. I'm really not low on it at all. I think it's pretty good. They're all really good except for arguably Chalice. But yeah. Next, we're going to talk about AMPHORA or AMPHORA. I don't know which one it is. This one, It's either now or at the start of your next turn, you get +1 buy and +3 money. And I saw this and I'm like, oh, this is trash. This is terrible. This is easily the worst one. And then I played with it. I'm like, actually, it's pretty good. And the reason it's pretty good is because you're going into loot to get the gold effect. You're going into loot to getting the buy effect. And AMPHORA does that for you. Except sometimes once in a while, you can choose to set it aside and take the money next turn, and it will skip your next shuffle, or it will make your next turn better because you don't really need that money, because you're already hitting double, you know? So, like, the extra 3 money doesn't really help you, and you will take it next turn. So, like, again, it's, like, marginally worse. Like, we're kind of scraping bottom of the barrel here, but, like, it's not a bad card. Right? It's not a bad card at all. Shield, also not really a bad card. But, like, again, we're really scraping the bottom of the barrel here. How often are you going to have shield in hand and it protects you against an attack? It's very, very specific. Especially with all of these expansions being very, like, friendly with how attacks are. Like, attacks just do less and less. So, like, with each new expansion, attacks are getting, like, kind of more rare. Like, attacks that really hurt. And, I don't know. It's like, relying on this to protect you against attacks, yeah, it'll save you once in a while. Absolutely. I'm not debating that. But, like, you're not going into loot for this to protect you. It's just kind of an incidental thing. And it doesn't really help you get more consistent otherwise, right? It just kind of saves you against, like, really getting hurt. And yeah, that's why I think that's the second worst. And then we have the worst, which is just Endless Chalice. I think this card is bad. I think this is easily the worst loot card. But it's basically like a bad Hireling Key hybrid. You get 1 coin, you get +1 buy for the rest of the game, every single turn, and you're like, oh, that's pretty nice. It helps me spike price points, except, like, by the time you get to loot, you're already kind of halfway done. And unless you get this super early, like turn 1, and even turn 1, this doesn't sound as exciting to me as Prize Goat or Hammer or Puzzle Box or Sextant or Insignia. Like, this still feels like the worst one on turn 1. Even on turn 1. Okay, I think it's better than Jewels early. I'll say that. It's probably better than Doubloons early, for sure. But it's probably better than Orb. I don't know why it's doing that. I'm sorry. But I think this one's just not too good. I think mostly it's good because it gives you plus buy every single turn. Like, you're not really excited about the coin. You're a lot more excited about the plus buy. And even then, like, you get plus buy from all of these other loots, and then also on top of that, this coin is going to very quickly outscale. Like, if you see if you see any of these twice, like, if you see any of these more than if you see any of these more than once in 3 turns, you're already outscaling Endless Chalice. Like, Endless Chalice is just highly inefficient. It's very, very slow. It just, I don't know. I'm just not really happy with Endless Chalice. Endless Chalice is like the one that I'm like, I got Endless Chalice. I didn't get literally any other. I don't think it's terrible, though. It's just like, okay, I mean, it kind of is terrible. Comparatively speaking to the other loot. But those are my feelings on the loot. I don't know if I'm going to review the other cards until the whole expansion is out. But yeah, these are my initial thoughts on the loot, at least right now. We'll see if there's any other loot cards that change my feeling on any of these. But yeah, that'll do it.